this is where I left off, I think, in my last presentation on the Egyptian. Recall it's one of the super frigates or the early heavy frigates launched in 1799. And at this point, as shown here, I had finished the gun deck and was moving on to the upper decks and to the stern, which had been left unfinished. So this is the stern. And while I've been working on both the upper decks and the stern intermittently and interchangeably, I'll focus for now on the stern. This is based on two models, contemporaneous, likely boatyard models from 1799. And those are both in the Musée de la Marine in Paris. And so this is, while there were some differences between them, this is a pretty good synthesis of the two models. What's interesting to me is that at this period, 1799, I think, as most people know, the French and British as well were reducing the amount of decoration found on the smaller ships, frigates, and the like. And so this is a little more ornate than most of its sister ships of this size and era. I attribute this in part to the fact that Napoleon, the year before, 1798, had fought and won the famous Battle of the Pyramids. And it was a big deal in France at that point. Things Egypt were a big deal in France, and he was quite the hero. And that may indicate why the ship had a little more decoration to it than otherwise. The decorations that you see are carvings, not paintings. And they are both dimensional and bas-relief. The central figure of a princess, I guess, with her pet crocodile, a little hard to see, but he's there being petted, I think. And she's holding a sistrum, which is an Egyptian musical instrument, a kind of shaker thing. She and the two vertical leafy things on either side of the lights, the windows, were more fully carved. The balance of the decoration shown is bas-relief. And so that is what I was dealing with as I started on this. Next one. Oh, I should say that it's about 2¼ inches width. You can sort of see here. So it starts with boxwood. There are two levels to it. It's difficult to see here, but the upper arch is overlaid on the lower pieces, and so it's slightly raised and then framed by molding. At this point, I have carved the princess and her crocodile and the two bas-relief elements next to her, the pyramids and the palm trees, and left space for the lights to be added. So here is pretty much the same, but with the dividers between the lights installed. So now I have added the two leaf carvings on either side of the lights. And as I said, these are fuller. Now, how I do that, what I have learned to do that works for me is to carve pieces, whether I'm doing full carvings or bas-relief, out of somewhat thicker pieces of boxwood. When I say thick, it's pretty darn thin by most measures. It's probably about 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little larger. But I've found that in order to avoid cracking or splitting, which happens if you're working with thin pieces of boxwood or any wood, better way to go about it is to start with a thicker piece, work down, and then when you finished it, back sand it to whatever you want the thickness to be. In this case, as in most cases, I've mounted it onto a piece of basswood, which I find gives me something to hold on to that's larger. And I tend to like to not use a vise, but to carve more freely so I can bring the work to the knife rather than just putting the knife against the work in a vise. My tool for this, 99%, was a number 11 blade. Gives you another perspective on these pieces as they're being finished. And as I say, they will be then cut off the backing piece and sanded from the back to be installed. So here they are once again installed. Now what I have done is added the decoration on the dividers on the stern lights. These I don't think of as carving so much as assemblages. What I have used for this is a dockyard gouge. If you're familiar with the dockyard tools, they're really excellent. This one is a 1.5 millimeter gouge, which I use to cut leaf shapes and then assemble the leaf shapes glued onto the dividers.
Richard, can I ask you a question here?
Yeah.
You say you've got the dockyard. Is this a firm you can get them off in the States?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought they were well known. They are an exceptional manufacturer of small tools, gouges, chisels, and they are stateside, but you can go online and find them. And they've been around for 30 or more years. The company went out of business, and some very able modelers rescued it and restarted it. So they are available. They are not cheap, but they last a long time. They're beautifully made. You'll see one coming up, in fact. Now, there are a couple different things going on here. The bottom decorations on either side are also built up of different pieces of carving. Or I shouldn't say carving, really it's cutting. I don't think of this as carving so much, but cutting or shaping small pieces that are then assembled and put together on the model. A point of interest for some, if you're not familiar with it, the lettering, how I go about that is I go on the laptop and find an appropriate font and right size and shape. And then I photocopy that, print that, and photocopy it in mirror image in reverse. And then take a piece, in this case, boxwood that will be used for the display of it, and coat that with matte medium. And while the matte medium is still wet, press the image onto it, face down, of course. Let that sit overnight, and then the next day, using a wet finger, rub off the paper. And if you do it carefully, the matte medium will have captured the lettering, the ink, and preserve it. When that is dry, I'll cut the banner to shape and then spray lacquer, a flat lacquer over it to protect it. I found that this works really, really well for this. And I've chosen black lettering here, but it can be done in color. It could be done in gold or whatever. I happen to prefer the black in this particular instance. Yes.
I've just got a bottle of Mod Podge for exactly that purpose.
Well. That works exactly the same way.
Do you think one has an edge over the other?
No, I think they're the same thing.
Then I'll keep the Mod. Doesn't surprise me. I'll keep the Mod Podge then. Yeah.
Keep the Mod Podge. I think they get to charge you an extra buck, but
minimum, yes. Did you use inkjet?
For this one, I used inkjet. Yes, this is
okay.
And I took it to commercial FedEx office or whatever the equivalent is.
Okay.
To have the mirror image made. So there's the dockyard 1.5 millimeter gouge along with the number 11 blade. Now I'm moving now to the bas-relief components. And for this, as I said before, I work with a thicker piece of wood, which prevents mostly prevents splitting as you're carving. What I do for these elements, which are this sort of circular thing, is to carve the interior using the gouge mainly, and then use rough cut, and then use sanding and files to cut the outside, and that saves the delicate sections from splitting also. But then, of course, I will back sand, remove them from the boxwood, the basswood, and back sand them to rough thickness. And then at this point, I will have a rough, unrefined shape that I can mount on the base. And so here, these pieces are mounted on the base. They're still crude, they're still rough, but once they're on the base, I can then use the number 11 blade to refine and shape them. And that's a very slow, long process.
It is, yeah.
But it's allows me to finish them without much fear of them splitting or breaking, because they're thoroughly glued down.
Richard, me again. What glue are you using, please?
I'm using Tight Bond, yellow.
Okay.
Yeah, Tight Bond 3, actually, I think it is. They keep changing. But yeah, I prefer white glue. If I lost a small piece that needed to be replaced, I might use a CA glue for a single small piece, but I prefer Tight Bond if I can.
Thank you.
So again, these are now crude. They are the crude shapes that need to be refined. And as I say, that's an ongoing process using the knife, scraping and carving. And it's one of the reasons, of course, that I also work on the quarter deck and other decks, because I just can't do this continuously. And so I shift back and forth and come back and look at it afresh and approach it again. And this is where we are today. So all of the pieces are in place. And like every other day or so, I come back and nibble at a little bit of it and play with it a little bit to refine it. But this is close to done. And of course, the next step will be to then add the mullions and the elements of the lights. The center lights are all glass. The two outer ones are false with wood backing. And this is where we are. So thank you.
That stern would be a model in itself. Absolutely lovely bit of work.
Well, thank you. There was a really wonderful Italian model maker, ship modeler, who did, and I've long lost the reference, but who did a galley that was just spectacular. And his comment about, when asked about that, was that his philosophy was to build each piece of the galley as though it were the final model. And I always thought that really was a good inspiration to try and at least aspire to. So, you know, this will have taken place over 3 months or so by the time it's completed. But I like to think of it as a standalone piece. And then, you know, the next piece will also be a standalone, and add them all to the model.
Will you be adding the soil pipes? I noticed the holes in the bottom corners are there.
Yes. Well, I won't be adding the pipes, but the holes themselves aren't on this. They are on a slanted piece below it.
Ah, oh, okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I noticed them on your first slide, and I thought, well, that's something you don't see often.
Yes, you got it. That's a separate piece, but of course we can't do without soil pipes, because the officers would not be happy.
Well, a lot of people don't bother, and I just thought, well, here's a perfect opportunity, particularly since they showed you them.
Well, yeah, and those were, I mean, that's the reality of the stern quarters of a ship of that era. Is you had to, your waste had to go somewhere, and usually straight down into the ocean. And then you had your staff to wash it down.
Those tools, are they easy to sharpen? I'm just curious.
Yes, if you have the right equipment. And the right equipment is also available online. Obviously, these are very, very small. So sharpening there is a set of honing shapes that are specifically designed for these tools by another company. And I can get you that information. It's not in front of me, but it's honing material and shapes that allow you to sharpen these. I wouldn't attempt to resharpen, grind them, but certainly honing does the job for most of the things if you take care of them. They are delicate and you can't handle them roughly, but I've had two sets of these, one going back 25 or 30 years and one more recent, but they last.
Well, for those of you who are interested, I actually just went to check the prices, and a set of 5 is $80 and a full set of 22 is $350. So they are not inexpensive,
But
They're not cheap.
important.
They're not cheap. It's an investment, but as I say, I've had one of those sets for 30 years. That's not a bad deal. And again, if you're not working at very small scale, you might not need those, but I think they're useful at almost any scale. I've used them in 1/4 inch.
Richard, on the second row, on the area above the windows, two sets of duplicates, and they look like figure 3s in reversed.
Right.
4 of them. Did you make each of those individually, or did you have a base and then sliced it into 3 or 4 sections?
No, they're made individually.
Okay.
Which is why there are flaws and which I like. I mean, I prefer the individual aspect to it, but no, they're made individually.
The real ones would have been made individually too and would have had flaws in them.
Yep.
Oh yes.
No, it's absolutely lovely.
By the way, the ones on the contemporaneous models, dockyard models that were built by the builders back in 1799 also have innumerable flaws. So, and those are 1/48.
Yes, yeah, some difference. Yeah. Any other questions?